Hello and welcome to another Hex video. In this video I hope to show you how you can use DigitalOcean to deploy an MPHX server or really any hex code that you want to run on an external Linux instance. So you can just go to digitalocean.com and create an account, or you can use the affiliate link which gives me a bit of a bonus, which would be nice, and then you can just create a droplet, which is just an instance of DigitalOcean. We can leave it on Ubuntu because that's easy to set up hex with. We'll choose $5 a month because that's more than what we need it for. I'll choose Singapore because that's closest to me, and I'll add my SSH keys, which I've already set up. We only want one droplet, and I'll choose the host name of MPHX Linux trial, and we will create that. As you can see, even the lowest tier, $5 a month, has half a gigabyte of RAM and 20 gigabytes disk space, which is more than you'll typically need for small scale projects. So we'll wait for this to load. Generally this is pretty quick. Nearly there. And there we go. So we've got an IP and we've got a Linux server running Ubuntu. So we can copy the IP and use an SSH client like Putty to connect to it, and I've got this open here and it's all set up for this IP, and we'll open it up, click yes, and then I'll type in my password for my key. There we go. So we're in a real Linux server or virtual private server, and we can do whatever we want. So let's install Hex so we can do whatever Hex stuff we want. Hex has a handy guide for installing Linux and Hexlib on Linux distributions, and of course we chose Ubuntu, so we can actually just copy this code and this will install the latest Hex version. We can just paste this straight into the SSH window and it will install Hex, all of it, including Hexlib. From here you can do whatever you want. For me, I'll install MPHX and its dependencies, and I'll install Git so I can download the code that I've written to run on the server, and then after that we can just run the server on it. But you can do whatever you want. Anything Hex can do on Linux you can do here. So it's nearly done, it's just installing everything. This is of course different to like apt-get. Well, it is using apt-get, but it's adding a separate package archive, so it gets the latest version. Alright, so now we've got Hex installed, and that's fine. Let's install Git so that we can clone code that we've got in repositories such as MPHX. So sudo apt-get install Git. I mightn't have needed to write sudo there, but oh well. There we go. So we've got Git and we've got Hex. That's really easy. These videos only went for 5 minutes and we've already got a Linux server set up with Hex and Git. So now I'm just going to do the MPHX specific stuff. So I guess I'll clone MPHX and install or run the examples. So MPHX GitHub, get the URL for that and just write hexlib git MPHX and paste the git URL. It'll give a warning about hexlib not being set up, so we just need to write hexlib setup, and we can click enter to leave it at the default, which works fine on Linux, and then we can run hexlib git again. And there we go, we've got MPHX installed. So now we can run the MPHX examples. So we've got a completely fresh server. There's no folders in the root directory. So here I'm actually just, even though I've already got the library installed with hexlib, I'm just going to clone it again in this main folder so that I've got easy access to the examples. So I've copied the git URL again, and now I'll just call git clone and paste that. So really, now we've got 2 copies of MPHX, except one is used as a library and one will only be used to run the examples servers. So now, if we type ls, we'll see that MPHX is there. So we can cd into it, cd into the example, and then we'll just run the basic one. Cd into the server folder, and then if you look in this folder, there's main.hx and run.hxml. So let's just run this with hex run.hxml. And as you can see, the server is started. We've got a live server. Now you'll see that it says server active on 127.0.0.1:8000 for port 8000. Now the problem with this is, of course, the default IP is 127.0.0.1 because most people testing this library will be testing it on their own computers and connecting to their servers on their own computer. So that's why that's the default, because 127.0.0.1 means this computer. So we can change that. The basic example actually has an option for changing that. If you just run this, and that will, what it's doing is it's compiling the code to Nico bytecode and then running that Nico code. So if we run that Nico code separately, which we need to do if we're to pass command line arguments, which is a little bit annoying, but it's not too much of a big deal. We can run Nico, and then now you'll see after we've run this, it's produced a Nico file called main.hx.n. So the .n is important because it denotes that it's a Nico file. So now we can just run Nico, which is also installed when we installed hex, main.hx.n, and then the IP of this server, because 127.0.0.1 means that only this server will be able to connect to the server. And of course, I want to connect to it from this computer, not in Singapore. So we'll get the IP, just here, copy that, and then paste it there. And that will tell the basic server, which is, you can see the example code, it just takes the first argument and sees if it's there, and then uses that as the IP. So it defaults to 127.0.0.1, but if there's an argument, it uses that argument as the IP. Now we can run this, and it'll say server active on this IP, and then I can jump back to this computer. So this is not an SSH window, this is local, and I can cd into the client folder and then run hex run.hxml, and that won't work, it'll crash. I'm currently not handling a server not existing yet in MPHX. I'll get to it. The library is still very, very alpha and has lots of things to be worked out. But just like the server, we can now call Nico main.hx.n and pass the IP. So again, I'll just put in the IP there. We don't need the port, and run that. And look at that. Server broadcasted a server-wide message, data was beep boop, which is what's meant to come up with the basic example. And then here, the client said hello with data 123, replying back a number of ways. So we've got a server in Singapore and this computer in Australia connected to each other and sending messages to and fro and responding to each other. What this really means is that you can have a Hexflixel game and you can have one player in America and one player in Australia, and they might not even know because it's international. DigitalOcean's great with Hex because, as you saw, it took 5 minutes to set up, and it's cheap. Like $5 a month for that tier was not expensive at all, in my opinion. And yeah, it's really convenient, and you don't have to deal with things like ports because everything's already open, which some might say is insecure, but if you're only running this server, I wouldn't really. So I hope you've learned something in this video. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you've learned something. Goodbye.